The hammer was about to fall. Clara Hayes stood in the scorching Texas sun, staring at the foreclosure notice nailed to her ranch gate like a death warrant. 3 days. That's all she had left before everything her father built, every fence post, every water well, every memory, would belong to strangers. The bank had no mercy for orphaned women in 1876. But when a mysterious cowboy with dusty boots and older eyes stepped forward to pay a debt that wasn't his, Clara would discover that some debts run deeper than money, and some strangers carry secrets that could either save you or destroy everything you thought you knew about honor. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The dust devils danced across the parched earth like ghosts of better days, swirling between the fence posts that marked the boundaries of the Hayes Ranch. Clara stood motionless at the gate, one hand gripping the weathered wood so tightly her knuckles had gone white, the other clutching the letter she'd read 17 times since dawn. The paper trembled in her fingers, not from the hot wind that swept across the Texas plain, but from the rage and terror warring inside her chest. Notice of foreclosure and sale. 4 words. That's all it took to condemn 3 generations of blood, sweat, and dreams. She'd found it nailed to the gate that morning, the hammer marks still fresh in the wood like wounds. Thomas Garrett, the bank manager from San Angelo, hadn't even had the decency to deliver it in person. Just sent his clerk before sunrise to post it like she was some common debtor who'd gambled away her fortune on cards and whiskey. Clara's jaw tightened. Her father had built this ranch from nothing, cleared the land himself, dug the wells with his own hands, strung every mile of fence wire while his fingers bled. James Hayes had been a hard man, stern and often silent, but he'd never asked for anything he didn't earn. He taught Clara to rope and brand before she could properly read, to shoot straight before she could bake bread, to value land above gold, because land was honest and gold made men liars. And now the land was slipping through her fingers like water through a sieve. 3 days, she whispered to the empty yard. 3 goddamn days. Behind her, the ranch house sat quiet in the morning heat. It was a modest structure, 2 rooms downstairs, a sleeping loft above, and a covered porch where her father used to sit after supper, smoking his pipe and staring at the horizon as if watching for something that never came. The paint had long since peeled away, leaving the wood bare and gray, but the structure was sound. Her father had built it to last 100 years. Now it would be sold at auction in 72 hours. Clara folded the notice carefully, creasing each edge with deliberate precision, then tucked it into the pocket of her split riding skirt. She wouldn't cry. Crying was for women who had the luxury of comfort, of family, of choices. She had none of those things. Her father had been dead 4 months. Pneumonia had taken him quickly, his lungs filling with fluid until he drowned in his own bed while Clara held his hand and felt utterly helpless. He tried to speak at the end, his lips forming words his failing breath couldn't carry, but she'd understood anyway. Hold the land, no matter what. She'd tried. Heaven knew she'd tried. But the drought had come hard that year, turning the grassland to dust and the creek to a memory. The cattle had grown thin, their ribs showing through their hides like the bars of a cage. She'd sold half the herd just to buy feed for the rest, then sold more to pay the hands their wages before letting them go. By spring, she'd been alone on the ranch with 20 head of cattle that weren't worth the brands they carried and a mortgage payment she couldn't make. The bank had been patient at first. Mr. Garrett had tipped his hat and called her Miss Hayes and told her he understood her difficult circumstances. He'd extended the payment deadline once, then twice, but patience had limits, and apparently Clara had exceeded them. Now the notice was posted. The auction was scheduled, and in 3 days, the Hayes Ranch would cease to exist. Clara turned away from the gate and walked toward the barn, her boots raising small clouds of dust with each step. The morning sun was already fierce, promising another brutal day. The sky stretched overhead, cloudless and indifferent, that particular shade of blue that seemed to mock anyone desperate enough to pray for rain. Inside the barn, the air was thick and still. 2 horses remained in the stalls. Pepper, her father's old gelding, and Bess, the mare Clara had raised from a foal. Both animals were thin, their coats dull despite her efforts to keep them groomed and fed. She'd have to sell them too before the auction, At least that way she could control where they went, make sure they ended up with someone who'd treat them decent. The thought made her stomach clench. "I'm sorry, girl," she murmured, running her hand along Bess's neck. The mare nickered softly, pressing her nose against Clara's shoulder. "I tried. I really tried." Bess didn't answer, of course, but her dark eyes seemed to understand anyway. In that way animals sometimes did. Clara leaned her forehead against the horse's warm shoulder and closed her eyes, allowing herself one moment of weakness, one brief second where she didn't have to be strong. Then she straightened, brushed the dust from her shirt, and got to work. The ride into San Angelo took 2 hours. Clara pushed Bess harder than she should have, but time was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. The town materialized out of the heat shimmer like a mirage. A collection of wooden buildings clustered along the main street, their false fronts painted with optimistic signs advertising goods and services that most folks couldn't afford. Clara tied Bess to the hitching post outside Calloway's general store and paused to compose herself. She could feel the eyes on her already, women in their Sunday dresses despite it being Thursday, merchants lounging in doorways, a group of ranch hands gathered outside the saloon. News traveled fast in a small town, and she had no doubt everyone knew about the foreclosure by now. Let them look. She had nothing left to lose except her dignity, and she'd be damned if she'd surrender that without a fight. The bell above the store door chimed as she entered. Inside, the air was marginally cooler, scented with leather and tobacco, and the sweet smell of penny candy in glass jars. Horace Calloway stood behind the counter, his spectacles perched on his bulbous nose, his apron stained with what looked like molasses. "Miss Hayes," he said, his tone carefully neutral, "what can I do for you today?" "I need supplies, Mr. Calloway. Flour, salt, coffee, if you have any, and ammunition, 30-30 caliber." Horace's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's a fair bit of ammunition. I've got coyotes troubling my remaining stock." It was a lie, but a believable one. Horace nodded and began gathering items, moving slowly as if age had settled into his bones overnight. Clara waited, her gaze drifting around the store. It looked the same as it had when her father used to bring her here as a child. The same wooden bins filled with dried beans and rice, the same shelves stocked with canned goods and bolts of fabric, the same portrait of President Grant hanging slightly crooked on the wall. Everything was the same, except her entire world had ended. "Will you be paying cash or credit, Miss Hayes?" Horace asked, setting the goods on the counter. Clara's hand went to her pocket, where she carried the last $6 she owned. It wouldn't be enough, but it would have to do. "Cash. And Mr. Calloway, I'll be needing to settle my account in full." His expression shifted, something like pity crossing his weathered face. "Now, Clara, there's no need for that. Your daddy had credit here for 20 years. I'm not about to—" "I insist." She pulled the bills from her pocket and set them on the counter. "Whatever these don't cover, I'll bring you the difference by tomorrow. You have my word." Horace stared at the money for a long moment, then sighed heavily. "Your word's always been good enough for me, but Clara—" "Please," she said quietly, "just add it up." He did, his pencil scratching across paper. The total came to $8.35. Clara stared at the number, calculating rapidly. She'd need to sell pepper. The old gelding would fetch maybe $10 from a rancher who needed a steady horse for work. It would cover the store debt with a little left over. "I'll have the rest to you tomorrow," she said. "There's no rush, truly." "Tomorrow, Mr. Calloway." He nodded, understanding that this wasn't about money anymore. It was about honor, about leaving this town with her head held high, even if she left with nothing else. He began wrapping her purchases in brown paper, his movements slow and deliberate. The bell above the door chimed again. Clara didn't turn around, but she felt the presence of whoever had entered, a shifting in the air, a subtle change in the atmosphere of the store. Horace glanced up, his eyes widening slightly. "Help you, sir?" he called out. "Just looking. Thanks." The voice was male, deep and rough like gravel under wagon wheels. There was something familiar about it, though Clara couldn't place it. A memory from childhood, perhaps, or a dream half remembered. She gathered her packages, keeping her back to the newcomer. The less interaction, the better. She was done being the subject of small-town gossip, done with the pitying glances and the carefully worded condolences that really meant, "I'm glad it's you and not me." "Miss Hayes." The voice was directly behind her now. Clara turned slowly, her arms full of parcels, and found herself facing a man she didn't recognize and yet somehow knew. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, weathered look of someone who'd spent his entire life outdoors. His face was all hard angles and sun-darkened skin, a scar running through his left eyebrow, gray eyes that seemed to see more than they should. He wore a dusty black hat, a faded denim shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and a gun belt that sat low on his hips in the way of men who knew how to use what they carried. But it was his eyes that caught her. They were studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Not with fear exactly, but with recognition, like he knew her, like he'd been looking for her. "Do I know you?" Clara asked, her voice steady despite the unease creeping up her spine. "Not anymore," he said. "But I knew your father, James Hayes. He ran the ranch north of town, didn't he?" Clara's grip tightened on her packages. "He did. He's dead now." "I heard. I'm sorry." The condolence sounded genuine, which somehow made it worse. Clara nodded once, curtly, and turned to leave. "I also heard about the foreclosure." She froze, her hand on the door. Behind her, she could hear Horace suddenly becoming very busy with something under his counter, desperate not to be part of this conversation. Heat flooded Clara's face. Not embarrassment exactly, but something close to it. Shame, maybe, or fury at the injustice of having her private catastrophe become public entertainment. "That's none of your concern, Mr. Crow." Elias Crow. The name meant nothing to her. "Well, Mr. Crow, I appreciate your condolences regarding my father, but my business is my own." "Even when it's posted on your gate for everyone to see?" Clara turned back around, her eyes flashing. "Especially then. Now, if you'll excuse me, your father saved my life once." The word stopped her more effectively than a hand on her arm would have. Clara stared at the stranger, at Elias Crow, trying to place him in her memories. Had he worked for her father? One of the seasonal hands who came through during Roundup? A neighbor from a nearby ranch? "When?" she asked. 10 years ago, maybe more. I was working the Campbell Ranch just north of your property. Got into a fight with another hand over something stupid. Whiskey and pride, mostly. Things got out of hand. I put him in the ground." Clara's eyes widened slightly. "You killed him?" "Didn't mean to, but intent doesn't matter much when a man stops breathing." Elias's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or just the memory of violence. "The Campbell foreman wanted to string me up, said justice would be swift and save everyone the trouble of a trial. Your father was there selling cattle. He stepped in." "What did he do?" "Talked them down. Said if they killed me, they'd be no better than me. Said I deserved a trial at least. At due process." Elias paused. "Then he offered to take me on himself. Said I could work off my debt to the dead man's family, that he'd keep me away from whiskey and trouble. He vouched for me. Put his reputation on the line for a killer he didn't know." Clara tried to remember this. She would have been 12, maybe 13, old enough to remember strangers on the ranch. But her father had always kept his business separate from home life. He'd never explained why he did what he did, and she'd learned not to ask. "I don't remember you," she said. "I was only there a month, worked dawn to dark, slept in the barn, kept to myself. Your father paid the dead man's family for my wages, then sent me on my way with enough money to start fresh. Never asked for anything in return, just told me to make something decent of myself." "Did you?" Elias's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Still working on it." Clara didn't know what to say to that. The store felt too small suddenly, the air too close. She adjusted her grip on her packages. "That's a fine story, Mr. Crow. I'm glad my father helped you. But I don't see what it has to do with, how much do you owe the bank?" The question was direct, almost brutal in its simplicity. Clara's jaw tightened. "That's none of your... How much?" "Why?" "Because I'm going to pay it." For a moment, Clara was certain she'd misheard him. The store seemed to tilt slightly, the walls shifting like they were painted on canvas. Behind the counter, Horace had gone completely still, his mouth slightly open. "Excuse me?" Claire's voice came out sharper than she intended. "Your debt to the bank. I'll pay it. All of it." "Why would you? That's absurd. You can't just—" "I can, and I will." Elias's expression was calm, matter of fact, as if he'd just offered to carry her packages rather than save her entire life. "Your father gave me a second chance when I deserved a rope. I owe him, and since he's not here to collect, the debt passes to you." Clara felt something hot and furious building in her chest. "I don't need charity. It's not charity, it's honor. I don't need that either. Maybe not, but I do." They stared at each other across the dusty floor of the general store. Clara could hear her own heartbeat, loud and insistent in her ears. This was madness. You didn't just pay off a stranger's debts because of something that happened a decade ago. People didn't do that. People looked after themselves and their own, and everyone else could fend for themselves. Except her father had done exactly that, apparently. Had stepped between a mob and a killer and said, "Not today." "How much?" Elias asked again. $1,500, Clara heard herself say. The number felt obscene spoken aloud. Plus interest and fees, closer to $1,700 total. She expected him to balk, expected the offer to evaporate like morning dew under the Texas sun. $1,700 was more money than most folks saw in 5 years. It was an impossible sum, a mountain of debt that had buried her completely. Elias just nodded. "When's the auction?" 3 days, Saturday at noon. "I'll have the money to the bank by end of business tomorrow." Clara's packages slipped from her grip. They hit the floor with a soft thud, flour and salt and coffee scattering across the boards. She didn't notice. She was staring at Elias Crow like he'd just sprouted wings and announced he could fly. "You can't," she whispered. "Nobody has that kind of money." "I do." "How?" "Does it matter?" "Yes!" The word came out louder than she intended. "Yes, it matters. You don't just— you can't. What do you want from me?" "Nothing." "Everyone wants something?" "Not me." Elias knelt down and began gathering her fallen purchases, his movements unhurried. "Your father wanted nothing from me except that I try to be better. I'm extending the same courtesy to you." Clara's mind was racing, trying to find the trap, the angle, the hidden price. Men didn't do things for nothing. There was always a cost, always something expected in return. Marriage, maybe? Her hand in exchange for her land? Or perhaps he wanted the ranch itself, a legal claim to the property once the debt was cleared. "I won't marry you," she blurted out. Elias looked up from the floor, genuine surprise crossing his face. Then he did smile, just a slight curve at the corner of his mouth, but unmistakable. "Wasn't aware I'd asked." "I won't sign over the deed either. If you think you can buy the ranch out from under me, the ranch is yours. I'm just clearing the debt. What you do with it after is your business." "Then what's the catch?" "No catch." "There's always a catch." Elias stood, holding her packages. He was close enough that she could see the flecks of green in his gray eyes, the lines around his mouth that spoke of hard years and harder choices. "Your father once told me that the world worked better when people helped each other without keeping score. That honor wasn't about what you got back, but about what you were willing to give. I didn't believe him then." He paused. "I'd like to believe him now." Clara realized she was trembling, not from fear, but from something else entirely. Hope, maybe, or the terrifying possibility that someone might actually help her without destroying her in the process. It felt dangerous, like standing at the edge of a cliff and being told the fall wouldn't kill her. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "You don't have to. Just accept it." Clara's throat closed. She couldn't remember the last time someone had offered her something that didn't come with strings attached. Couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at her and seen something worth saving. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes." "Mr. Crow, Elias. Elias." His name felt strange on her tongue. "Why are you really doing this?" He was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant, looking at something only he could see. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost vulnerable. "Because your father saw something in me worth saving when no one else did. because he gave me a chance I didn't deserve and never asked me to explain myself or prove I was worthy. He just helped. Elias met her eyes. And because I've spent 10 years trying to figure out how to pay back a debt to a man I can never thank. This is the closest I can get. Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. If you do this, if you really do this, I'll pay you back. Every cent. I don't know how long it'll take, but I swear. No. What? No debt. No repayment. This isn't a loan, Clara. It's a gift. A debt I owe being passed forward. If you want to honor it, do for someone else what your father did for me. Help someone who doesn't deserve it. Save someone everyone else has given up on. That's the only payment I want. She couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight, her chest too full of emotion she'd been holding back for 4 months. Grief and relief and disbelief all tangled together until she couldn't tell them apart. Horace cleared his throat from behind the counter. I'll just wrap these up again, shall I? Take your time, folks. Elias held out the packages. Clara took them, her fingers brushing his for just a moment. His hands were calloused, scarred, the hands of a man who'd worked hard and lived harder. I'll ride out to your ranch this evening, he said. If that's all right. We can go over the details, make sure everything's in order for the bank. Clara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Until then. Elias tipped his hat and turned to leave. Wait, Clara called out. He paused at the door, looking back. Thank you. I know that's not enough, but thank you. It's enough, Elias said quietly. Then he was gone, the door swinging shut behind him, the bell chiming once like a benediction. Clara stood frozen in the middle of the store, her arms full of packages, her mind reeling. Horace came around the counter, his expression a mixture of wonder and concern. Did that just happen? Clara asked. Appears so. I don't understand it. Sometimes, Horace said gently, you don't have to understand grace. You just have to accept it. Clara rode back to the ranch in a daze, Bess's steady gait carrying her through the heat without conscious direction. Her mind kept circling back to the conversation in the store, trying to find the flaw in Elias Crow's offer, the hidden danger. But no matter how many times she examined his words, she couldn't find the trap. He was going to pay her debt. $1,700. Just give it to her. It defied everything she'd learned about the world, everything she'd experienced since her father's death. People didn't help for nothing. There was always a price, always an expectation, and yet Elias had looked her in the eye and said no debt, no repayment, and she'd believed him. Maybe she was a fool. Maybe she'd wake up tomorrow to find it had all been a cruel joke or a misunderstanding. Maybe Elias Crow would disappear into the same heat shimmer he'd emerged from, and she'd be right back where she started, broke, alone, and 3 days from losing everything. But maybe, just maybe, her father had planted a seed 10 years ago, and now it was finally bearing fruit. The ranch came into view as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The house looked small and shabby in the golden light, the barn leaning slightly to one side, the corral fence in desperate need of repair. It wasn't much, but it was hers, her father's legacy, her mother's grave, her childhood and her future all wrapped up in this patch of dust and dreams. And now, impossibly, she might get to keep it. Clara dismounted and led Bess into the barn, her movements automatic. She removed the saddle, brushed the mare down, made sure both horses had water and the last of the feed. Then she walked to the house and climbed the porch steps slowly, each one creaking under her weight. Inside, the house was dim and cool. Clara set her packages on the kitchen table and stood there, just breathing. The silence was absolute. No voices, no footsteps, no sound of her father working outside or humming tunelessly while he cleaned his rifle. Just her. Alone. Except maybe not anymore. She moved to the window and looked out across the property. The land stretched away in all directions, hard and unforgiving but beautiful in its way. The sky was turning pink and orange, the clouds catching fire in the fading light. Her father used to say that sunsets like this were why he'd stayed, why he'd built his life in this harsh country. Because sometimes beauty was worth fighting for, even when the fight seemed impossible. Clara pressed her palm against the window glass. It was still warm from the day's heat. "I'm going to save it, Papa," she whispered to the empty room. "I'm going to hold the land, no matter what." And for the first time in 4 months, she believed it might actually be true. Elias Crow arrived just as the last light was bleeding from the sky. Clara heard his horse before she saw him, a steady clip-clop of hooves on hard-packed earth. She stepped out onto the porch and watched him ride up, a dark silhouette against the purple twilight. He dismounted smoothly and tied his horse, a sturdy bay gelding, to the porch rail. Then he removed his hat and looked up at her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "Miss Hayes." "Mr. Crow," Clara gestured to the porch. "Come sit. We should talk." They settled into the 2 rocking chairs that flanked the front door, the same chairs where Clara's parents used to sit in the evenings, watching the sun go down. The wood was worn smooth from years of use, comfortable in a way that expensive furniture never was. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Clara found herself oddly comfortable with the silence. Most people felt compelled to fill every quiet moment with words, but Elias seemed content to just sit and watch the night settle over the land. "It's beautiful out here," he said eventually. "It's harsh," Clara corrected, "especially this year." "Harsh things can still be beautiful." Clara glanced at him. In the dimness, his face was all shadow and sharp angles. "You sound like my father." "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is one." Clara rocked slowly, the chair creaking. "Tell me about when you knew him. I want to understand." Elias was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he began speaking, his voice low and steady. "I was 23, angry at the world and everyone in it. My own father had been a drunk who beat my mother until she stopped moving one night, then hanged himself in the barn before the law could come for him. I'd been on my own since I was 16, drifting from ranch to ranch, working just long enough to earn drinking money before moving on." He paused, his jaw tightening. "The fight happened on a Saturday night. The other hand, his name was Porter, I think. He said something about my mother, something crude. I'd had too much whiskey and not enough sense. I hit him. He hit back. Then I hit him harder. Then he fell and his head struck the corner of a feed trough and he just stopped." Clara could picture it perfectly. The fight, the sudden silence, the growing realization that everything had changed in an instant. "The other hands wanted blood for blood," Elias continued. "Justice, they called it. But it wasn't justice. It was vengeance. The foreman had the rope ready. They'd already picked out the tree." He rubbed his wrists absently, as if feeling phantom ropes. "Your father was there to finalize a cattle purchase. He'd been in the Campbell office going over papers. When he came out and saw what was happening, he didn't hesitate." "What did he say?" "He asked if I'd meant to kill Porter. I said no. He asked if I was sorry. I said yes. Then he turned to the foreman and said, 'Then he deserves a chance to prove it.'" Elias smiled slightly at the memory. "The foreman argued, said I was a killer and killers didn't change. Your father said, 'Everyone's someone's child. Everyone deserves a chance to be better than their worst moment.' Then he offered to take me on." Clara's eyes stung. Those words sounded exactly like something her father would say. He'd been a hard man, but never a cruel one. Never someone who believed people were beyond redemption. "I worked your ranch for a month," Elias said. "Mended fences, cleaned stalls, did whatever needed doing. Your father barely spoke to me except to give directions, but he was watching, always watching. And when the month was up, he paid me a full hand's wages, more than I deserved, and told me to make better choices." "And did you?" "I tried. Stopped drinking, worked honest jobs, saved my money instead of gambling it away." Elias turned to look at her. "But I never forgot what your father did. Never forgot that he saw something in me worth saving when I couldn't see it myself. I've spent 10 years trying to earn the faith he showed in a stranger." "And now you want to pay it forward," Clara said softly. "I need to." They rocked in silence again, the night settling around them like a blanket. An owl called from somewhere in the darkness, its voice lonely and haunting. Clara thought about her father, about all the things she'd never known about him, about the lives he'd touched that she'd never heard about. "The money," she said finally. "Where did it come from? If you don't mind me asking." Cattle drives. I worked as a drover for 5 years, going up to Kansas and back. Saved every dollar I didn't need for food and gear. Then I got hired on at a big ranch in New Mexico. The owner took a liking to me, taught me about breeding stock and land management. When he died last year, he left me a parcel of land and enough money to start my own herd. Elias paused. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to help you and still have something left to build on. You're giving me your future, Clara said. No, I'm investing in someone else's, the way your father invested in mine. Clara felt her throat tighten again. I don't know how to accept this. It feels wrong somehow. Too much. It's just the right amount, Elias said. No more, no less. The exact size of the debt I owe. But you'll be... Clara struggled for words. You'll be starting over. I've started over before. I'm good at it. She wanted to argue, to find a way to refuse that wouldn't dishonor his offer or her father's memory. But there was no refusing. The money would save her ranch. And if she turned it down out of pride, she'd be no better than the people who'd wanted to hang Elias instead of giving him a second chance. All right, she said quietly. I accept. And thank you. For my father, for me. For giving me a chance to keep fighting. Elias nodded. I'll go to the bank first thing tomorrow. Make sure everything's settled before the deadline. Will you... Clara hesitated. Will you come back after, to the ranch? I'd like to know it's done, that it's real. I'll come back. Good. Clara stood and Elias rose as well. They faced each other in the darkness, two strangers bound together by a debt neither of them fully understood. Stay safe, Mr. Crow. Elias, he corrected gently. Elias. The name felt less strange now, almost natural. Stay safe. You too, Clara. He walked to his horse and mounted smoothly. For a moment he sat there, silhouetted against the star-filled sky, looking like something out of a storybook, a knight-errant maybe, or an avenging angel. Then he touched his hat brim in farewell and rode off into the darkness. Clara watched until she couldn't see him anymore, until there was nothing left but the sound of hoofbeats fading into silence. Then she sank back into the rocking chair and let herself shake. She was going to keep the ranch. The bank wouldn't take it. Her father's legacy would survive. And it was all because of a man she'd met this morning, a stranger with a debt he insisted on paying. Clara looked up at the stars, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Somewhere up there, she imagined her father was watching, maybe smiling, maybe just nodding in that quiet way of his that meant you're doing all right, girl. You're doing just fine. Thank you, Papa, she whispered, for being the kind of man who saved strangers, for teaching me to fight, for giving me something worth fighting for. The knight didn't answer, but somehow Clara felt less alone than she had in months. She sat there until the stars wheeled overhead and the moon rose, casting silver light across her land, her future, her second chance. Then she went inside, lit a lamp, and began planning what came next. The ranch would need work. The fences needed mending. The barn needed shoring up. The cattle needed better grazing. It would take time and effort and every ounce of strength she had. But she had time now. She had a future. And tomorrow, when Elias Crow paid her debt to the bank, she'd have hope. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Clara didn't sleep that night. She lay in her narrow bed in the loft, staring at the ceiling beams her father had hewn from trees he'd cut himself, and tried to convince herself that the events of the day had actually happened. That Elias Crow was real, that his offer was genuine, that tomorrow morning he would walk into the San Angelo bank and pay a debt that would save everything she had left in the world. Every time she closed her eyes, doubt crept in. What if he changed his mind? What if the money didn't exist? What if this was some elaborate cruelty, a way to give her hope just so someone could watch it shatter? But then she remembered his eyes, gray and steady and honest in a way that couldn't be faked. She remembered the way he'd spoken about her father with a reverence that came from genuine gratitude, not manipulation. And she remembered his hands, scarred and calloused from years of hard work, the hands of a man who knew what it meant to build something from nothing. He would do it. She believed that now, in the dark hours before dawn, when belief was hardest to hold on to. He would do it because he'd promised, and men like Elias Crow didn't make promises they couldn't keep. The first light of morning found Clara already dressed and standing on the porch, watching the horizon turn from black to gray to pale gold. The air was still cool, holding the memory of night, but she could already feel the heat building. Another scorching day, another test of endurance. She fed the horses, mucked out the stalls, and checked the water level in the well. The routine task grounded her, gave her hands something to do while her mind raced ahead to San Angelo, to the bank, to the moment when everything would either be saved or finally, irrevocably lost. By mid-morning, she couldn't stand the waiting anymore. Clara saddled Bess and rode toward town, telling herself she was going to check on something at the general store, knowing she was really going to see if Elias Crow was a man of his word. The ride felt longer than it had yesterday. Every mile stretched out, every minute crawled by. Bess sensed her agitation and tossed her head nervously, but Clara kept the mare at a steady pace, refusing to let her desperation show even to a horse. San Angelo appeared through the heat shimmer, and Clara's heart began to hammer against her ribs. She tied Bess to the hitching post outside the bank and stood there for a moment, gathering her courage. The building was imposing, 2 stories of red brick with white columns flanking the entrance, as if Thomas Garrett wanted everyone to know that money meant power, and power meant architecture that made regular folks feel small. Clara climbed the steps and pushed through the heavy door. Inside, the air was noticeably cooler. The bank smelled of leather and paper and furniture polish, everything clean and ordered and proper. Thomas Garrett sat behind a massive oak desk at the far end of the room, his thinning hair slicked back with pomade, his suit pressed and perfect. He looked up as Clara entered, and something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps, or disappointment that she hadn't simply disappeared and made his job easier. But it was the man standing in front of Garrett's desk who captured Clara's attention. Elias Crow stood with his back to the door, his hat in his hands, his shoulders set in a way that suggested he was prepared for a fight if necessary. "Miss Hayes," Garrett said, rising from his chair with false courtesy. What an unexpected pleasure. Clara's eyes remained fixed on Elias. He turned slowly, and when their gazes met, she saw confirmation in his expression. He'd done it, or was doing it. The money was here. "Mr. Garrett," Clara said, finding her voice. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "You're not interrupting," Elias said quietly. "We were just finishing." Garrett's smile was tight, his displeasure barely concealed. He gestured to a stack of papers on his desk. "Mr. Crow has indeed settled your account in full, Miss Hayes. The foreclosure has been canceled. The notice will be removed from your property this afternoon." Clara felt her knees go weak. She reached for the back of a nearby chair to steady herself. "In full?" "Every cent," Elias confirmed, "plus the fees and interest." "I see." Clara's voice came from somewhere far away. That's very generous." Garrett cleared his throat. "While this is certainly good news for you, Miss Hayes, I must say I find the circumstances somewhat irregular. Mr. Crow's relationship to you and your property is, shall we say, unclear." "My relationship is none of your concern," Elias said, his tone pleasant but with an edge underneath. "The debt is paid. That's all that matters. Nevertheless, I feel compelled to ask Miss Hayes directly if this arrangement is one she entered into willingly." Garrett turned to Clara, his eyebrows raised in a parody of concern. "Are you quite certain you understand what you're agreeing to?" The implication was clear, that Clara was too simple or desperate to recognize a trap when she saw one. Heat flooded her face, but she kept her voice level. "I understand perfectly, Mr. Garrett. Mr. Crow has done me a great service out of respect for my late father. There are no conditions, no expectations, and no agreements beyond the satisfaction of a debt of honor." "A debt of honor," Garrett repeated, skepticism dripping from every word. "How quaint." "How decent," Clara corrected. "Something you might understand if you possessed the capacity." Garrett's face flushed dark red. Elias made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Clara didn't care. She was tired of men like Garrett treating her like a child or an idiot or something to be managed and controlled. "The papers, please," she said, extending her hand. "I assume I need to sign something." Garrett shuffled through the documents with sharp, angry movements. "These acknowledge receipt of payment and cancellation of the foreclosure. Sign here, here, and here." He jabbed his finger at 3 different spots. Clara took the pen he offered and signed her name 3 times. Clara Elizabeth Hayes, the same signature she'd watched her father make on documents throughout her childhood. Each stroke of the pen felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen from her. When she finished, Garrett snatched the papers back and filed them away with unnecessary force. "You should know, Miss Hayes, that the bank will be watching your property closely. Any future difficulties with payments won't happen," Clara said firmly. "You have my word." The word of a woman alone on a failing ranch. Garrett's smile was cruel. "Forgive me if I don't find that particularly reassuring." "Then perhaps you'll find my word more reassuring," Elias said softly, and there was something in his voice that made even Garrett pause. "I'll be staying on at the Hayes Ranch for the foreseeable future, helping with repairs and operations, so Miss Hayes won't be alone and the ranch won't be failing." Clara's head snapped around to stare at Elias. This wasn't part of the agreement. This wasn't what they'd discussed. He'd paid the debt, fulfilled his obligation to her father's memory. He didn't need to do anything more. But Elias wasn't looking at her. He was watching Garrett with those steady gray eyes, daring the banker to challenge him. "I see," Garrett said slowly. "And what is your interest in the property, Mr. Crow?" "My interest is in making sure it succeeds, nothing more." "How noble." The sarcasm was thick. "Well then, I suppose there's nothing more to discuss. Good day to you both." It was a dismissal and not a polite one. Clara turned and walked toward the door, her spine straight, her head high. She would not give Thomas Garrett the satisfaction of seeing her relief or her gratitude or her confusion about what Elias had just committed himself to. Elias followed her out into the morning sunshine. The door closed behind them with a heavy thud, like the ceiling of a tomb or the ending of a chapter. Clara stood on the bank steps, blinking in the bright light, trying to process what had just happened. "You're staying?" The words came out before she could stop them. "If you'll have me." "But you don't need to. You've already—" "I know what I've done," Elias said. "And I know what I'm offering now. 2 different things." Clara descended the steps and moved to where Bess was tied, needing something to do with her hands. She stroked the mare's neck, her mind spinning. Why? Because that ranch needs more than just money to survive. It needs work, hard work, the kind that takes months, not days. "I can hire hands." "With what?" "The debt's paid, but you're not exactly flush with cash for wages." He was right, and Clara hated that he was right. "So what are you proposing? That you work for free?" "I'm proposing I work for room and board until the ranch is back on its feet. Once you're profitable again, we can discuss wages. Until then, consider it part of the debt I owe your father." Clara turned to face him fully. "You don't owe anything more. You've paid enough." "That's not how I see it." "Then how do you see it?" Elias was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. When he spoke, his voice was soft but certain. "Your father didn't just give me money or a job. He gave me purpose, a reason to be better. I've spent 10 years working other people's land, building other people's dreams. Maybe it's time I helped build something that matters. And my ranch matters? Your ranch is your father's legacy. That makes it matter more than most things in this world." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she didn't need help, didn't need anyone, could handle everything herself the way she'd been handling it for 4 months. But the words wouldn't come because they weren't true. She couldn't do it alone. The evidence was in the foreclosure notice that had been nailed to her gate, in the debt she couldn't pay, in the night she'd lain awake trying to figure out how to save something that was already slipping away. "Room and board," she said finally. "But you sleep in the barn. I won't have people talking." "Agreed. And we split the work evenly. I won't be treated like I'm helpless. Wouldn't dream of it. And if I tell you to leave, you leave. No arguments." Elias extended his hand. "You have my word." Clara looked at his outstretched hand, calloused, scarred, steady. Then she took it. His grip was firm but not crushing, warm despite the morning heat. They shook once, a bargain sealed in the old way, with nothing but trust and intention. "When do you want to start?" Clara asked. "How about now?" They rode back to the ranch together, their horses side by side on the dusty road. Clara found herself acutely aware of Elias's presence. The way he sat his horse with easy confidence, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, alert for danger or opportunity. He was quiet, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of someone comfortable with himself and the world around him. "Tell me about the ranch," Elias said after a while. "What needs the most attention?" Clara considered. "Everything, honestly, but the well is getting low. If we lose water, we lose everything. The fences are falling apart in 3 sections along the north pasture. The barn roof leaks. The cattle need better grazing, but I've been afraid to move them too far from the house because I couldn't watch them properly alone. So we start with the well. Make sure the water's secure, then fences, then barn, then we worry about the herd. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it's doable. One task at a time, one day at a time." Clara glanced at him. "You sound like you've done this before. Rebuilt struggling ranches? Once or twice. Turns out a lot of people are one bad season away from losing everything. I've helped where I could." "And then moved on?" "Usually." Elias paused. "This feels different, though." "Why?" "Because this time it's personal. This time I'm not just helping a stranger, I'm honoring someone who changed my life." Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They rode in silence until the ranch came into view, small and shabby in the harsh midday light, but still standing, still hers. "It's not much," she said, suddenly self-conscious. "It's more than I had at your age," Elias replied, "and more than most folks will ever have. Land is everything out here. You're richer than you know." They dismounted and led the horses to the barn. Clara showed Elias where he could stable his gelding, where the tack was stored, how the water system worked. He listened carefully, asked intelligent questions, and never once made her feel like he was taking over or diminishing her authority. It was a strange feeling, having someone to share the burden with. Strange, but not unwelcome. "I'll get my bedroll from my saddlebag," Elias said. "Set up in the back corner there, if that's all right." "It's fine. There's a stove in the tack room if you need to heat anything, and I'll bring supper out around sunset." "You don't have to do that." "Room and board," Clara reminded him. "That was the agreement. You work, I feed you." Elias smiled slightly. "Fair enough." Clara left him to settle in and walk to the house, her mind still reeling from the events of the morning. The ranch was saved. The debt was paid. And now she had help, real help, from someone who knew what he was doing and didn't expect anything in return except a chance to make good on a promise. It felt too good to be true, and Clara had learned the hard way that things that seemed too good to be true usually were. But as she prepared a simple lunch of bread and dried beef, watching through the kitchen window as Elias moved around the barn with the easy efficiency of someone who'd spent his whole life working ranches, she allowed herself a tiny spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things were finally starting to turn around. The afternoon heat was brutal. Clara and Elias worked on the well together, hauling up buckets of water to check the level, examining the pulley system for weakness, reinforcing the stone walls that lined the shaft. It was hard, sweaty work, and by the time the sun began its descent, Clara's arms ached and her shirt was soaked through, but the well was secure, the water was flowing, they'd made progress. "That'll hold," Elias said, wiping his forehead with his sleeve, "but we should dig a second well before winter. Redundancy is survival out here." Clara nodded, too tired to argue. "I'll heat some water for washing. There's a basin behind the house." "Appreciate it." She prepared a simple supper, beans and cornbread, nothing fancy, but filling and hot. She brought it out to the barn on a tray, along with a pitcher of water and 2 tin cups. Elias had cleared a space near his bedroll and was sitting cross-legged on the ground, examining a piece of harness leather. "Supper," Clara announced. "Smells good." They ate in the comfortable silence that had characterized most of their day. Clara was surprised by how easy it was to be around him. No forced conversation, no awkward attempts at small talk. Just 2 people sharing a meal after a long day's work. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said finally, setting down her empty plate. "Sure." "Why haven't you settled down somewhere? You're not young anymore. Most men your age have families, property, roots." Elias was quiet for a long moment. "I've never felt like I deserved those things. After what I did, killing that man, I figured the best I could hope for was to work hard and stay out of trouble. building a life, having a family. That seemed like more than someone like me should ask for. That's a lonely way to live. It is, he admitted, but it seemed like the right punishment. You've been punishing yourself for 10 years? Seemed fair. Clara studied him in the fading light. My father didn't save you so you could spend the rest of your life in penance. He saved you so you could live. Maybe. But living and deserving to live are different things. No, Clara said firmly. They're not. You made a mistake, a terrible one. But you've spent a decade trying to atone for it. At some point, you have to forgive yourself. That easy, huh? I didn't say it was easy, but it's necessary. Clara stood and gathered the plates. My father believed in second chances. But second chances don't mean anything if you spend them punishing yourself for needing them in the first place. She left before Elias could respond, walking back to the house with the dishes. She could feel his eyes on her back, but she didn't turn around. Some truths needed space to settle, and she'd said what needed saying. Inside, Clara washed the dishes and changed into her nightdress, then climbed to the loft. But sleep wouldn't come. She lay in the darkness, listening to the night sounds, crickets chirping, somewhere an owl calling, the soft movement of the horses in the barn. And she thought about Elias Crow, sleeping alone in that barn, carrying a burden of guilt that should have been set down years ago. She thought about her father, who'd seen past the violence to the man underneath and decided he was worth saving. And she thought about herself, about the walls she'd built around her heart after her mother died. Walls her father's death had reinforced until she'd convinced herself she didn't need anyone, couldn't trust anyone, had to do everything alone. Maybe they were both wrong. Maybe loneliness wasn't strength. Maybe accepting help wasn't weakness. Maybe the bravest thing you could do was let someone in. The thought terrified her, but lying there in the darkness, listening to the night, and thinking about the man in her barn who'd paid her debts and asked for nothing, Clara felt something shift inside her chest. Not love. It was too soon for that. Too complicated. But something softer than suspicion. Something like possibility. She fell asleep with that feeling warming her from the inside like the first hint of spring after a brutal winter. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Clara and Elias worked from sunup to sundown, tackling the endless list of repairs and improvements the ranch needed. They fixed fences and patched the barn roof. They moved the cattle to better grazing and reinforced the corral. They worked side by side, learning each other's rhythms, developing the kind of wordless communication that came from shared labor and common purpose. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, they began to talk. Not about anything profound at first, just observations about the work, comments about the weather, occasional stories about past experiences. But gradually the conversations deepened. Elias told her about the years after he'd left the Hayes Ranch, the jobs he'd worked, the places he'd seen. Clara told him about growing up as the only child of a taciturn rancher, about her mother's death when she was 10, about the loneliness of being a woman in a man's world where your competence was always questioned and your authority always challenged. They discovered they had more in common than either expected. Both had lost parents young. Both had learned to rely on themselves because there was no one else. Both carried scars, his visible on his hands and face, hers invisible but just as real. One evening, almost a week after Elias had paid the debt, Clara brought supper out to the barn as usual. But instead of eating and leaving, she sat down across from him and said, "Tell me about the fight. The one that killed that man." Elias's hand stilled on his plate. "Why do you want to know?" "Because you've been carrying it alone for 10 years. Maybe it's time you shared the weight." He was quiet for so long Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set down his fork and began to speak. His name was Robert Porter. He was 26, married, had a baby daughter. He was a good hand, better than me, honestly. But he had a mean streak when he drank, liked to find people's weak spots and press until something broke. Elias's voice was flat, emotionless, but Clara could hear the pain underneath. That night, he decided my weak spot was my mother. Started talking about her, saying things I won't repeat. Ugly things, true things mostly, but ugly. "And you snapped." "I did. Hit him before I even thought about it. And once I started, I couldn't stop. Years of anger just erupted. Anger at my father for what he'd done to her. Anger at myself for not being able to protect her. Anger at the whole damn world for being so cruel. Elias looked down at his hands. By the time I came back to myself, Porter was on the ground, and the other hands were pulling me off. His skull was cracked. He died before morning. Clara's throat tightened. And his wife? His daughter? Your father made sure they were taken care of, gave them money out of my wages, and then some. I don't know what happened to them after. I hope they're all right. I hope the daughter doesn't remember her father. I hope she grew up happy. You don't know. I was afraid to find out. Afraid I'd make things worse somehow just by existing. Elias met her eyes. Your father told me once that some debts can never be repaid, but that doesn't mean you stop trying. That's what I've been doing, trying. Reached across the space between them and placed her hand over his. His skin was warm, his calluses rough against her palm. You're a good man, Elias Crow. What you did was terrible, but who you are now, that's what matters. Is it? Yes. She squeezed his hand once, then released it. My father thought so. I think so too. Something shifted in Elias's expression, a softening, a crack in the armor he'd been wearing for a decade. Thank you, he said quietly, for listening, for not looking at me like I'm a monster. You're not a monster. You're just a man who made a mistake and has been trying to make amends ever since. That's more than most people can say. They finished eating in silence, but it was different than before. Deeper, more intimate. As if by sharing his darkest moment, Elias had given Clara a piece of himself he'd never given anyone else. And Clara found she wanted to give something back. Not tonight, she wasn't ready. But soon. Soon she'd tell him about the nights after her father died when she'd stood in the dark with his rifle in her hands, wondering if it wouldn't be easier to just end it all. About the shame she felt for not being enough to save the ranch on her own. About the fear that lived in her chest like a stone. The fear that she was fundamentally unlovable, and that's why she'd ended up alone. But for now, this was enough. The sitting together in the barn, sharing food and stories, and the comfortable silence that came after difficult truths had been spoken. It was more than enough. It was everything. The rain came without warning 3 weeks later, on an afternoon so hot that Clara had been watching the cloudless sky with something close to despair. She and Elias had been working on the north fence line, replacing rotted posts and restringing wire, when the first dark clouds appeared on the horizon like a promise or a threat. Storm coming, Elias said, straightening from his work and shading his eyes against the glare. Big one by the look of it. Clara followed his gaze. The clouds were building fast, towering thunderheads that turned the sky bruised and angry. Lightning flickered in their depths, too distant yet for thunder. The air had gone still and heavy, that peculiar waiting quality that came before nature unleashed itself. We should head back, Clara said, already gathering their tools. Get the horses secured before it hits. But even as she spoke, the wind picked up, not gradually, but all at once, as if someone had opened a door in the sky. It whipped Clara's hair across her face and sent dust devils spinning across the parched ground. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in as many seconds. Elias was already moving toward the horses. Come on, we need to... The rest of his words were swallowed by the first crack of thunder, so loud and close that Clara felt it in her chest like a physical blow. The horses screamed and reared, eyes rolling white with panic. Pepper, the older gelding, managed to pull his reins free from where Elias had looped them over a fence post and bolted, galloping wildly across the open range. Damn it, Elias swore, lunging for his own mount. Clara, get on Bess. We need to catch him before he breaks a leg in a prairie dog hole. Clara was already running. She grabbed Bess's reins and swung into the saddle just as the first fat drops of rain began to fall. Within seconds, those drops became a downpour, the kind of sudden deluge that turned visibility to nothing and the ground to soup. Lightning split the sky, illuminating everything in stark white flashes. Thunder rolled continuously, making it impossible to hear anything else. Through the curtain of rain, Claire could just make out Pepper's dark shape racing toward the line shack, a small shelter they maintained on the far edge of the property for exactly this kind of emergency. The old horse was running blind, driven by instinct and terror. Clara leaned low over Bess's neck and urged the mare forward. Behind her, she could hear the pounding of Elias's horse, but she didn't look back. All her attention was focused on catching Pepper before he hurt himself or disappeared into the storm entirely. The ground was already treacherous, slick with mud and water. Bess stumbled once, caught herself, kept running. Rain lashed Clara's face, soaking through her clothes in seconds, making her fingers numb on the reins. She couldn't see more than a few yards ahead. Lightning struck somewhere close, close enough that the thunder was simultaneous, close enough that Clara felt the hair on her arms stand up. Pepper was slowing, his panic giving way to exhaustion. Clara pushed Bess harder, closing the distance. Another 100 yards and she'd have him. Another 50. Another... Bess's front hoof caught in something. A hole. A root. Clara would never know. And the mare went down hard. Clara had just enough time to kick free of the stirrups before she hit the ground, the impact driving the air from her lungs. She rolled instinctively the way her father had taught her years ago, and came up on her hands and knees in the mud. Pain exploded through her left ankle. Sharp, vicious, unmistakable. She tried to stand and her leg buckled, sending her back down with a cry she couldn't hold back. "Clara!" Elias was there, off his horse, and kneeling beside her in the mud and rain. "Are you hurt?" "My ankle," she gasped. "I think it's broken." Elias's hands moved over her leg, gentle but efficient, checking for damage. When he touched the ankle, Clara couldn't suppress a sharp hiss of pain. "Not broken," he said, "but badly sprained. You can't walk on it." "Bess!" Clara looked around frantically. The mare was on her feet but limping badly, favoring her right foreleg. "Is she—" "She'll be fine. Just bruised." Elias was already scanning the landscape, what little they could see through the storm. Lightning flashed again, and in that moment of illumination, Clara saw the line shack, perhaps a quarter-mile away. "Can you ride?" "I think so." "We need to get to the shack. The storm's only getting worse, and you need to get that ankle elevated and wrapped." He moved to help her up, and Clara gritted her teeth against the pain as she tried to put weight on her injured foot. It was impossible. Her ankle simply wouldn't hold her. Elias didn't hesitate. He scooped her up in his arms as if she weighed nothing, carrying her to his horse. The gelding was nervous, dancing sideways, but Elias spoke to him in low, soothing tones until the animal steadied. Then he lifted Clara into the saddle and swung up behind her, gathering the reins in one hand while his other arm wrapped around her waist, holding her secure against his chest. "What about Bess?" Clara asked. "And Pepper?" "They'll follow or they won't. Right now, keeping you safe is more important." Clara wanted to argue, but another crack of thunder drowned out any protest. Elias urged his horse toward the line shack, moving as fast as he dared in the treacherous conditions. Clara could feel the tension in his body, the way his arm tightened around her each time lightning struck, the steady rhythm of his breathing against her back. Despite the pain and the fear and the absolute fury of the storm, she felt safe pressed against him like this, sheltered by his body from the worst of the wind and rain. The ride to the shack felt endless and impossibly brief all at once. By the time they reached it, Clara was shaking from cold, from shock, from the adrenaline slowly draining from her system. Elias dismounted and pulled her down carefully, then kicked open the door of the shack and carried her inside. The interior was small and spare, a single room with a potbelly stove, a narrow cot, a table and chair, and shelves stocked with emergency supplies. It smelled of dust and old smoke and the particular mustiness of a place that went long periods unused. But it was dry, and it was shelter, and right now that was everything. Elias deposited Clara gently on the cot, then went back outside. Through the open door, Clara could see him leading his horse to the small lean-to attached to the shack. A moment later, Bess limped into view, followed by Pepper. All three horses were soaked and spooked, but alive and relatively unharmed. Elias got them under cover, unsaddled them quickly, then returned to the shack and shut the door against the storm. For a moment, they just stood there, or in Clara's case, sat, dripping water onto the floor, breathing hard, listening to the rain hammer against the roof and the thunder roll across the sky. Lightning flashed through the single small window, turning everything stark and strange. "Let me see that ankle," Elias said finally. Clara extended her leg, wincing as even that small movement sent pain shooting up to her knee. Elias knelt and carefully removed her boot. She had to bite her lip to keep from crying out, then peeled away her sock. The ankle was already swelling, turning purple and angry. "Definitely sprained," Elias confirmed. "Bad one, too. You're going to be off that foot for at least a week, maybe 2. I don't have a week, Clara said. The ranch will survive without you hobbling around making things worse. His tone was firm but not unkind. I can handle the daily work. You focus on healing. He moved to the shelves and began rummaging through supplies. He found a basin, a clean cloth, and a length of bandage that looked like it had been there since the shack was built. Outside, the storm raged on with no sign of letting up. The temperature had dropped dramatically, and Clara realized she was shivering violently, her wet clothes clinging to her skin. Elias noticed. You need to get out of those wet things before you catch pneumonia. Clara's eyes widened. I don't have anything else to wear. There should be some old clothes in the chest over there. Previous owner left them. They'll be too big, but dry is more important than fit right now. He turned his back, busying himself with starting a fire in the stove. I won't look. Clara hesitated, then realized she didn't have much choice. Hypothermia was a real danger, and modesty seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford. Moving carefully to avoid jarring her ankle, she stripped off her soaked shirt and split skirt, draping them over the back of the chair. In the chest, she found a man's shirt that hung to her knees and a pair of woolen socks. It wasn't much, but it was dry and warm. Decent, she said quietly. Elias turned around, and something flickered across his face when he saw her. Surprise, maybe, or something else Clara couldn't quite identify. She was suddenly acutely aware of how she must look. Hair plastered to her head, wearing nothing but an oversized shirt, her bare legs exposed from mid-thigh down, except for the thick socks. Better? He asked, his voice rougher than usual. Warmer, at least. He nodded and went back to tending the fire. Soon warmth began to spread through the small space, driving back the chill. Elias hung her wet clothes near the stove to dry, then found a clean bowl and filled it with water from the rain barrel outside. He knelt beside the cot again and began gently cleaning the mud from her injured ankle. His touch was surprisingly tender for hands so calloused and scarred. Clara watched him work, noting the concentration on his face, the careful way he supported her foot to minimize pain. There was something intimate about the moment, the small room, the storm outside, the gentleness of his hands on her skin. Thank you, Clara said softly, for coming after me, for getting me here safely. Where else would I be? Elias didn't look up from his task. You needed help. Most men would have gone after the horses first. Horses are valuable. I'm just... Don't. The word was sharp enough to make Clara fall silent. Elias finally met her eyes, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Don't diminish yourself like that. You're not just anything. You're brave and strong and stubborn as hell, and the horses can be replaced. You can't. Clara felt heat flooding her face that had nothing to do with the fire. I didn't mean, I know what you meant, and I'm telling you you're wrong. He returned his attention to wrapping her ankle, his movements precise and sure. Your father once told me that the measure of a person isn't what they own or what they can do, but who they are when everything's been stripped away. By that measure, Clara Hayes, you're worth more than all the horses and land in Texas. The bandage was snug but not too tight. Elias tied it off with practiced efficiency, then stood and moved away, as if the moment of closeness had been too much. He busied himself checking the supplies, taking inventory of what they had. Clara watched him, her heart doing strange things in her chest. How long do you think we'll be stuck here? She asked, needing to break the tension. Hard to say. Could be hours. Could be until morning. Elias glanced at the window where rain still lashed against the glass. This is a big storm, the kind that settles in for a while. We don't have much food. We have enough. Dried beef, some hardtack, coffee if I can get it hot. We won't starve. He paused. You should rest. Lie back and try to keep that ankle elevated. Clara did as he suggested, propping her foot on a folded blanket Elias provided. The position was awkward, but it helped with the throbbing pain. Outside, the storm continued its assault, thunder rumbling like distant artillery. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in stuttering bursts. Elias sat in the chair by the table, as far from the cot as the small space allowed. He'd removed his own wet shirt and was wearing just his undershirt, which clung to his torso in a way that made Clara very aware of the breadth of his shoulders, the lean muscle of his arms. She looked away quickly, but not before he caught her staring. "Sorry," she muttered. "I didn't mean to—" "It's fine," he sounded amused. "Not much privacy in a room this size." They fell into silence again, but it was different now, charged, heavy with things unspoken. Clara found herself thinking about the past 3 weeks, about how easily Elias had become part of her daily life, how she'd started looking forward to their evening conversations, to the way he made her laugh with dry observations about the chickens' personalities or the territorial disputes between the barn cats. How she'd started noticing little things, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the rough gentleness of his hands, the quiet competence with which he approached every task. How she'd started to care about him in a way that went beyond gratitude or friendship. The realization should have terrified her. She'd spent so long alone, so long convinced she was better off without attachments, without vulnerability. But lying there in the flickering firelight, listening to the storm and watching Elias sit so carefully far away, Clara felt something crack open inside her chest. Something that had been locked tight since her father died, maybe longer. "Elias," she said quietly. He looked up. "Yeah? Why did you really stay, after you paid the debt? Why did you really offer to help with the ranch?" He was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim light. When he spoke, his voice was low and honest. "At first, because I thought it was the right thing to do. Your father's legacy deserved more than just a cleared debt. It deserved to thrive. And now? Now?" Elias's jaw tightened. "Now it's more complicated." "How?" "Clara, tell me." She pushed herself up on her elbows, ignoring the twinge of pain from her ankle. "I need to know." Elias stood and paced to the window, staring out at the storm. Lightning flashed, throwing his profile into sharp relief. "Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about your father and started being about you. Because I wake up thinking about whether you got enough sleep. Because I find myself making excuses to work near wherever you are. Because when you fell today, the fear I felt—" He broke off, running a hand through his damp hair. "It wasn't the fear of failing a duty or breaking a promise. It was the fear of losing something I didn't realize I'd started to need." Clara's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it over the rain. "Elias, I know I have no right." He turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his expression nearly undid her. "I'm nobody. A drifter with blood on his hands and nothing to offer except hard work and good intentions. You deserve better than someone like me. Don't I get to decide what I deserve? You should decide based on facts, not—" He gestured helplessly. "Not this. Not whatever's happening here." Clara swung her legs off the cot, setting her feet on the floor despite the pain it caused. "Then here are the facts. You paid a debt you didn't owe because you're a man of honor. You've worked yourself to exhaustion every day for 3 weeks to help save my ranch. You carried me through a storm and risked your life to make sure I was safe. And right now, you're standing over there trying to protect me from yourself because you think I can't handle making my own choices." She took a shaky breath. "Well, here's my choice, Elias Crow. I choose you." The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. Elias stared at her, something like wonder and terror warring on his face. "Clara, you don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying I'm tired of being alone. I'm saying I'm tired of pretending I don't feel anything when you look at me. I'm saying that for the first time since my father died, I don't feel like I'm drowning." Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't care. "And I'm saying that if you walk away because you think you're not good enough, then you're a coward. And I don't believe you're a coward." Thunder crashed, shaking the walls. In the flash of lightning that followed, Clara saw Elias's resolve crumble. He crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees in front of the cot, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that belied their roughness. "I'm not good enough for you," he said, his voice raw. "I'll never be good enough. But if you're sure, if you really want this, then I swear I'll spend every day trying to become the man you deserve." "You already are," Clara whispered. And then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and the storm outside seemed to move inside her chest, wild and fierce and cleansing. His lips were warm and surprisingly soft, tasting of rain and something uniquely him. His hands moved into her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss, and Clara made a sound in the back of her throat that was half gasp, half surrender. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elias rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he said. "I know. People will talk. About us. About what it means that I'm living on your property. Let them talk. Clara, I don't care what they say, Elias. I don't care what anyone thinks except you and me. We know the truth. That's all that matters." He pulled back enough to look at her properly, his gray eyes searching her face. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him, because he smiled, really smiled, the first genuine, unreserved smile she'd ever seen from him. It transformed his face, made him look younger, less burdened. "You're remarkable," he said softly. "Do you know that? I'm stubborn and difficult, and I don't know when to quit. That's what makes you remarkable." He kissed her again, softer this time, almost reverent. Then he stood and went to stoke the fire, adding more wood to keep the warmth going through what promised to be a long night. Clara watched him move around the small space, her heart still racing, her lips still tingling from his kiss. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside the line shack, something had shifted. Something had been found that neither of them had been looking for but both desperately needed. Clara lay back on the cot, and when Elias finished with the fire, she held out her hand to him. "Sit with me," she said. "Please." He hesitated only a moment before taking her hand and settling onto the edge of the cot. The space was small, forcing them close together. Clara shifted to make room, and Elias carefully arranged himself so he wasn't jostling her injured ankle. They sat like that, hands intertwined, shoulders touching, listening to the rain and the thunder and the crackling of the fire. "Tell me about your dreams," Clara said after a while. "The ones you gave up to help me." Elias was quiet for a long time. "I wanted to see the ocean," he said finally. "Stupid, maybe. But I grew up landlocked, and I always wondered what it would be like to stand at the edge of something that big and endless, to see water stretch all the way to the horizon. That's not stupid. It's impractical. The ocean's 1,000 miles from here. And what would I do once I saw it? Turn around and come back? Maybe you'd stay, find work on the coast, build a life there." "Maybe," Elias squeezed her hand, "but that was before." "Before what?" "Before I found something worth more than wandering. Before I found you." Clara felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I'll take you there someday. To the ocean. When the ranch is stable and we can afford to leave for a while. I want you to see it." "You don't have to." "I want to. Because your dreams matter too, Elias. Not just mine. Not just the ranch. You matter." He turned to look at her, and in his eyes Clara saw something she'd never seen before. Hope. Raw and tentative and almost painful in its fragility. As if he'd spent so long believing he didn't deserve happiness that the possibility of it was almost too much to bear. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "How to be with someone. How to build something that lasts. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together." "What if I fail you? What if you don't?" Elias laughed softly, shaking his head. "You make it sound so simple." "Maybe it is. Maybe we've both been making it complicated because we're scared." "I am scared," he confessed. "Terrified. Of hurting you. Of not being enough. Of waking up one day and realizing you've figured out you made a mistake." Clara lifted their joined hands and pressed a kiss to his scarred knuckles. "Then we'll be scared together. But Elias, listen to me. You are enough. You've always been enough. The man who killed Robert Porter 10 years ago, he's not who you are anymore. You've become someone else. Someone better. And that person is exactly who I need." Tears were sliding down Elias's face now, slow and silent. He didn't try to hide them or wipe them away. He just sat there, holding Clara's hand, letting himself feel something he'd denied himself for a decade. Acceptance, forgiveness, love. "Thank you," he whispered, "for seeing me, for giving me this chance." "Thank you for taking it," Clara replied. They stayed like that as the storm slowly began to ease, the thunder moving farther away, the rain settling from a deluge into a steady drumming. The fire burned low but steady, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with them both. Elias lay down beside Clara on the narrow cot, carefully arranging himself so he wasn't putting pressure on her ankle. It was cramped and awkward, but neither of them cared. Clara rested her head on his shoulder, her hand over his heart, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. His arm wrapped around her, holding her close, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara felt completely safe, completely at peace. "Elias?" she murmured, half asleep. "Hmm? I'm glad you came back. To Texas. To me." "So am I," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "So am I." They drifted off together, the storm still raging outside, but unable to touch them here in their shelter. Two people who'd been lost finding each other in the middle of nowhere. Two broken pieces fitting together to make something whole. And when morning came, when the storm finally passed and they emerged to find the world washed clean and new, Clara knew nothing would ever be the same. They'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, made promises without words that bound them more surely than any vow. The ranch would still need work. The future was still uncertain, but now they would face it together, and somehow that made all the difference in the world. Dawn broke with the kind of clarity that only came after violent storms. The sky scrubbed clean and impossibly blue. Clara woke to find herself wrapped in Elias's arms, her injured ankle throbbing but bearable, and the morning light streaming through the small window of the lined shack, painting everything gold. For a moment, she didn't move, didn't want to disturb the peace of this perfect moment, but reality had a way of intruding, and her shifting woke Elias. His eyes opened slowly, and when they focused on her face, something softened in his expression that made her heart ache. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning." Clara smiled. "The storm passed?" "So it did." He carefully extracted his arm from beneath her, mindful of her injury. "How's the ankle?" "Painful, but I'll live." Elias sat up and moved to the window, looking out at the transformed landscape. The rain had turned everything green, or at least greener. Puddles dotted the ground, reflecting the morning sky like scattered mirrors. The air coming through the cracks in the door smelled fresh and alive in a way it hadn't for months. "We should head back," he said. "Check on the ranch. Make sure the storm didn't do too much damage." Clara nodded, though part of her wanted to stay here forever, suspended in this moment before the world came rushing back with all its complications and consequences. But ranches didn't run themselves, and they'd already been gone a full night. People in town would talk if they knew. They'd talk anyway, probably, but there was no sense in making it worse. Elias helped her dress, turning his back while she struggled into her mostly dry clothes. Her ankle had swollen overnight, the bruising now a spectacular purple and black that made her wince just looking at it. Getting her boot on was agony, but she managed it through gritted teeth and sheer stubbornness. "You shouldn't ride," Elias said, eyeing her ankle with concern. "Not on that. I can't exactly walk home." "You'll ride with me. We'll pony Bess behind us." Clara wanted to argue, to insist she could manage on her own, but the truth was she couldn't. Her independence had limits, and a badly sprained ankle was one of them. So she let Elias help her outside and lift her onto his horse, then swing up behind her. His arm settled around her waist, and despite everything, the pain, the worry, the uncertain future, Clara felt safe. The ride back took twice as long as it should have. The ground was muddy and treacherous, forcing them to take it slow. They passed several places where the storm had left its mark. A lightning-struck tree split down the middle, a section of fence blown flat, a gully now running with water that had been bone-dry the day before. But overall, the damage seemed manageable. The rain, despite its violence, had been a gift. The land needed it desperately. When the ranch house came into view, Clara felt a complicated mix of relief and apprehension. The building was still standing, apparently undamaged. The barn looked intact, but now they had to face what came next, the reality of what had shifted between them last night and what that meant for their future. Elias helped her down and half carried her to the house, depositing her gently in one of the rocking chairs on the porch. "Stay here," he said. "I'll check the barn and the stock, make sure everything's secure. Then I'll come back and we'll figure out breakfast." "Elias," Clara caught his hand. "About last night, we'll talk," he promised, "after I make sure the ranch is all right." Just rest that ankle." He was gone before she could respond, striding across the muddy yard to the barn. Clara watched him go, her mind churning. In the cold light of morning, doubts crept in. Had she been too forward, too presumptuous? They barely knew each other, really. 3 weeks was nothing. Maybe the storm and the fear and the intimacy of the line shack had clouded her judgment. Maybe she'd made a terrible mistake. But then she remembered the way he'd looked at her when he said she was remarkable, the tenderness in his kiss, the vulnerability in his tears. Those weren't things you could fake. Whatever was happening between them, it was real. Complicated and uncertain and probably foolish, but real. Elias emerged from the barn 20 minutes later, his expression relieved. "Stock's fine. Barn held up well. Some water got in, but nothing we can't mop up. Fences took a beating in a few places, but we expected that." "Good," Clara gestured to the other chair. "Sit. We need to talk." Elias lowered himself into the chair slowly, like a man expecting bad news. His hands gripped his knees, knuckles white. "If you're having second thoughts, I'm not." Clara spoke firmly, wanting to eliminate that fear immediately. "But we need to figure out how this works. Practically, I mean. People are going to notice the change. They're going to talk. Let them." "It's not that simple. My reputation—" "I know." Elias ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I know it's not fair. A man can do as he pleases, and it's just life. A woman steps outside the lines, and suddenly she's—" He broke off, jaw tight. "But I won't have you feeling ashamed of me. Of us." "I'm not ashamed," Clara said quietly. "I'm just aware of reality. And the reality is that an unmarried woman living with an unmarried man will cause scandal. It could hurt the ranch, make it harder to do business." Elias was silent for a long moment, his gray eyes fixed on something in the distance. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but Clara could hear the tension underneath. "Then we get married." Clara's breath caught. "What?" "We get married, soon. This week, if you'll have me." He turned to look at her directly. "I know it's fast. I know we should probably take our time, do this properly. But Clara, I meant what I said last night. I'm done running from things that matter. And you matter more than anything in this world. Elias, you can't just— Marriage isn't something you do to solve a problem. Is that all this would be to you? A solution to a problem?" "No." Clara's voice was fierce. "No, but I won't have you proposing out of obligation or because you think it's the proper thing to do." "Then let me be clear." Elias got up and knelt in front of her chair, taking both her hands in his. "I'm not proposing because of propriety or obligation or anything else except this. I want to spend my life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to build this ranch into something your father would be proud of, and I want to do it as your partner in every sense of the word." "I love you, Clara Hayes. I think I started loving you the moment you looked me in the eye in that general store and refused to be grateful for charity." Tears were streaming down Clara's face. "You love me?" "I do, completely, terrifyingly, more than I thought I was capable of loving anyone." His hands tightened on hers. "So yes, I'm asking you to marry me. But I'm not asking because it's convenient or because people will talk. I'm asking because I can't imagine a future that doesn't have you in it." Clara couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight, her heart too full. She pulled one hand free and touched his face, tracing the scar through his eyebrow, the rough stubble on his jaw, committing every detail to memory. "I love you too," she whispered. "I didn't want to. I fought it. But I love you anyway." "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." The smile that spread across Elias's face was like sunrise breaking over the prairie, slow and bright and transforming everything it touched. He surged up and kissed her, deep and claiming, and Clara kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, they were both laughing and crying at the same time. "This week?" Clara said, trying to catch her breath. "You really want to do this that fast? Unless you want to wait. We can wait if you need time to—" "No." Clara surprised herself with the certainty in her voice. "No, I don't want to wait. Life's too short and too hard to waste time when you found something good. Let's do it this week." Elias kissed her again, softer this time, almost reverent. I don't have a ring. I don't have anything to offer you except myself and my promise to never stop trying to be worthy of you. That's more than enough. Clara rested her forehead against his. But Elias, you have to understand, this ranch will always be hard work. We'll have good years and bad years. There will be times when we barely scrape by. Times when we question if it's worth it. I know. And I'm not easy to live with. I'm stubborn and independent, and I have a temper. I know that too. And sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night missing my father so much I can't breathe. Sometimes I'll need to cry and I won't want to talk about it. Then I'll hold you while you cry. Elias cupped her face in his hands. Clara, I'm not asking for easy. I'm not asking for perfect. I'm asking for real, for honest, for a life where we face things together instead of alone. That's all. Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Elias kissed her once more, then stood and helped her to her feet. Come on, let's get you inside. You need to elevate that ankle, and I need to start breakfast. We've got a wedding to plan. The next few days passed in a blur of activity and emotion. Clara's ankle forced her to stay off her feet, which meant Elias handled most of the ranch work alone. But in the evenings, they sat together on the porch or in the small kitchen, making plans and dreaming about the future. They decided to have a simple ceremony in the ranch house, just them and a judge from San Angelo to make it legal. No fuss, no spectacle, just two people making a promise to each other. On Wednesday, Elias rode into town to arrange for the judge and to buy supplies. He returned with a shy smile and a small velvet box that he pressed into Clara's hands. Inside was a simple gold band, nothing fancy, but when she slid it onto her finger, it fit perfectly. It's beautiful, she said, tears welling up again. The jeweler in San Angelo said I could bring it back if it didn't fit right, but Elias shrugged. I told him it would be perfect, and it is. How did you know my size? I didn't. I just hoped. He took her hand and kissed her ring finger just above where the band sat. Seems like Hope's been treating me pretty well lately. They were married on Saturday afternoon, 6 days after the storm that had changed everything. The judge arrived at 2 o'clock, a portly man named Henderson who asked no questions and raised no objections when Elias explained the situation. Clara wore her mother's dress, altered to fit and carefully pressed. Elias wore his cleanest shirt and had actually attempted to tame his hair, though it was already escaping whatever pomade he'd used. They stood in the main room of the ranch house, sunlight streaming through the windows, and spoke their vows. Clara's voice shook when she promised to love and honor Elias for the rest of her life, but it never wavered. Elias's voice was steady and strong when he made the same promise to her, his gray eyes never leaving her face. By the power vested in me by the state of Texas, Judge Henderson said, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Crow, you may kiss your bride. And he did, thoroughly, until the judge cleared his throat and reminded them he was still in the room. They signed the papers that made it official, and Judge Henderson rode away with his fee and his discretion intact. And then Clara and Elias were alone, married, standing in the middle of the ranch house, looking at each other like they couldn't quite believe what they'd just done. So, Elias said finally, we're married. We are. You're stuck with me now. Clara laughed. I think you're stuck with me. Best thing I've ever been stuck with. He pulled her close and kissed her again, and this time there was no judge to interrupt them. The kiss deepened, turned heated, and Clara felt something unfurl in her chest. Want, need, the kind of desire she'd never let herself feel before because there had been no one to feel it for. Elias, she breathed against his lips. Yeah? Take me upstairs. His eyes darkened. Your ankle is fine. I'm fine. I want... She couldn't find the words, so she kissed him instead, pouring everything she felt into it. Elias groaned and scooped her up, carrying her carefully up the narrow stairs to the loft. He laid her on the bed, her bed, their bed now, and knelt beside her. Are you sure? He asked, his voice rough. Because there's no going back. I don't want to go back. Clara reached up and pulled him down to her. I only want to go forward, with you. What happened next was tender and awkward and perfect all at once. They were both nervous, both fumbling in their inexperience, but they were also patient with each other, gentle. When Elias finally made them one, Clara gasped at the brief pain and then the overwhelming rightness of it. This was what it meant to belong to someone, to choose them and be chosen in return. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the fading afternoon light, sweaty and breathless and utterly content. Elias traced lazy patterns on Clara's bare shoulder, his other arm pillowed under her head. "I never thought I'd have this," he said quietly. "A home, a wife, a future worth living." Clara turned to look at him. "And now?" "Now I can't imagine anything else." He kissed her temple. "Thank you." "For what?" "For giving me a reason to stay. For seeing something in me worth loving. For being brave enough to take a chance on a man who didn't deserve one." "You deserved it," Clara said fiercely. "You've always deserved it. You just needed to believe it yourself." Elias pulled her closer, and they drifted into a doze, wrapped in each other and the drowsy warmth of late afternoon. When they woke, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded Clara of the sunsets her father used to watch from the porch. "He would have liked you," she said suddenly. "My father, he would have approved." "You think so?" "I know so. He always said the measure of a man was what he did when no one was watching, when there was nothing to gain and everything to lose." Clara propped herself up on one elbow to look at Elias properly. "You've been proving yourself when no one was watching for 10 years, building a life, keeping your promises, trying to be better. That's exactly the kind of man he respected. I wish I could have thanked him properly, told him what his kindness meant. You are thanking him. Every day you're here, working this ranch, taking care of me. That's the thank you he would have wanted." Elias nodded, his expression thoughtful. Then he sat up abruptly. "I have something for you, a wedding gift. It's not much, but..." He climbed out of bed and padded downstairs, unself-conscious in his nakedness. Clara heard him rummaging around, then his footsteps on the stairs again. He returned holding a piece of paper, worn and carefully folded. "I've been carrying this for years," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Your father gave it to me the day he sent me on my way. I've read it probably 1,000 times whenever I doubted myself or needed to remember why I was trying so hard to be better." Clara took the paper and unfolded it carefully. Inside, in her father's distinctive blocky handwriting, were just a few lines. "Every man deserves a second chance to prove he's more than his worst mistake. The only payment I ask is that you extend the same grace to someone else when your time comes. James Hayes." Tears blurred Clara's vision. She traced the words with her finger, imagining her father sitting at the kitchen table, carefully writing this note for a young man he barely knew, but chose to believe in anyway. "He was a good man," Elias said softly. "The best man I've ever known. And you're just like him, Clara. You have his strength, his fairness, his ability to see the good in people." "I'm not like him," Clara said. "He never doubted himself, never questioned if he was doing the right thing. I think he doubted plenty, he just didn't let it stop him from acting." Elias took her hand. "That's what you do too. You're scared, but you're brave anyway. That's not weakness, Clara. That's the truest kind of strength there is." Clara carefully refolded the note and handed it back. "Keep it. It's yours. But thank you for showing it to me, for letting me see that side of him. It's our gift now, mine and yours. A reminder of what we're building here. A legacy of second chances and choosing to believe the best in people." Elias set the note on the bedside table and pulled Clara back into his arms. "We're going to make him proud, both of us, together." "Promise?" Clara whispered. "I promise." They stayed in bed as night fell, talking about everything and nothing. Clara told Elias about her childhood, about learning to ride before she could properly walk, about her mother's laugh and her father's rare smiles. Elias told her about the places he'd worked, the people he'd met, the long, lonely years of drifting that had finally led him here. Eventually, hunger drove them downstairs. They cooked together in the small kitchen, bumping into each other in the confined space and laughing about it. It was domestic and ordinary and absolutely perfect. This was what Clara had been missing without knowing it. Not just someone to share the work with, but someone to share the quiet moments too. The simple joy of making dinner together, of sitting across a table and talking about tomorrow's tasks, of planning a future instead of just surviving one day at a time. After supper, they walked out to the porch despite the darkness. The night was clear and cool, the stars brilliant overhead. Clara leaned against the railing, and Elias stood behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on the top of her head. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That 3 months ago I stood in almost this exact spot and thought about giving up, about walking away from everything and just letting the bank take it all." Clara's voice was quiet. "I was so tired, Elias, tired of fighting alone, tired of losing. I'd convinced myself that nothing I did mattered, that I was going to fail no matter how hard I tried. And now? Now I'm standing here with my husband, looking at land that's ours, planning a future that actually seems possible. It's like living in a completely different world." Elias tightened his arms around her. "You were never going to fail, Clara. You're too stubborn for that, but I'm glad you don't have to fight alone anymore." "So am I." Clara turned in his arms to face him. "Promise me something. Anything. Promise me that when things get hard, and they will get hard, you won't regret staying. You won't look back and wish you'd kept drifting." "Clara, I need to hear it." Her voice cracked. "I need to know that when the drought comes back, or the cattle get sick, or the money runs out, you won't resent being tied down here. That you won't wish you'd chosen the ocean over me." Elias cupped her face in his hands, making sure she was looking directly at him. "Listen to me. I spent 10 years running because I thought I didn't deserve to stay anywhere. I told myself I wanted freedom, wanted to see the world, but the truth is I was just scared. Scared of caring about something enough to lose it, scared of putting down roots and having them torn up." He kissed her softly. "But I'm not scared anymore. Or maybe I am, but I'd rather be scared here with you than safe and alone anywhere else. You're not tying me down, Clara. You're giving me a reason to finally stand still. But the ocean can wait. Hell, maybe we'll get there someday. Like you said, take a trip when the ranch can spare us. But even if we don't, it doesn't matter." Elias smiled. "Because I've already found what I was really looking for. I just didn't know it until I met you." Clara kissed him then, pouring all her fear and hope and love into it. When they finally broke apart, she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too, more than words can say." They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other in the Texas night. Above them, the stars wheeled slowly across the sky, the same stars that had witnessed her father's struggles and triumphs, the same stars that would watch over their future. Clara thought about the chain of grace that had led to this moment, her father's kindness to a stranger, that stranger's determination to repay an unpayable debt, her own desperate willingness to accept help when pride said she shouldn't. Small choices, she realized. Small moments of choosing compassion over judgment, connection over safety, hope over despair. Those were the things that built a life worth living. "Come on," Elias said finally. "Let's go to bed. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Tomorrow's always a long day on a ranch. True, but tomorrow we face it together, as partners, as husband and wife. Clara smiled and let him lead her inside, back up the narrow stairs to the loft, where they'd made their vows real. And as she lay down beside him, as he pulled her close and kissed her goodnight, she thought about how sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the person you saved ended up saving you right back. Tomorrow, they would wake up and get to work. There would be fences to mend and cattle to tend and 1,000 small tasks that needed doing. But they would do them together, and that would make all the difference. The ranch her father built would not just survive, it would thrive. Because Clara Hayes Crow and Elias Crow were going to make damn sure of it. The first test of their marriage came sooner than either of them expected. 2 weeks after the wedding, Clara woke to find Elias already gone from their bed, the space beside her cold. She dressed quickly and found him in the barn, standing in front of Pepper's stall with an expression that made her stomach drop. "What's wrong?" she asked, though she could already see. The old gelding was lying on his side, breathing shallow and labored, his eyes glazed with pain. "Colic, I think," Elias said quietly. Bad case. I've been with him since before dawn, trying to get him up and moving, but he won't budge. Clara moved to the stall door and looked at the horse that had carried her father for 15 years. Pepper had been her father's favorite, the steadiest mount she'd ever known, patient with beginners and reliable in a crisis. Seeing him like this felt like losing another piece of her father. Can we save him? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Elias shook his head. I've seen this before. He's suffering, Clara. The kindest thing, I know. Her voice broke. I know what we have to do. Elias retrieved his rifle from the tack room while Clara knelt beside Pepper, stroking his neck and whispering words of gratitude for all the years he'd served faithfully. The horse's breathing was getting worse, his whole body trembling with pain. When Elias returned, Clara stood and stepped back, unable to watch but unable to leave either. The shot echoed across the ranch, final and absolute. Clara flinched but didn't cry. Not yet. There would be time for tears later. Right now they had work to do. They spent the morning digging a grave on the small rise behind the house, not far from where Clara's mother was buried. It was hard work, the ground still damp from the storm, but resistant nonetheless. They took turns with the shovel, neither speaking, both lost in their own thoughts. When the hole was deep enough, Elias hitched the remaining horses to drag Pepper's body to the gravesite. They lowered him in carefully, respectfully, and then filled the earth back in. Clara stood over the fresh mound, her hands filthy with dirt, her back aching from the labor. He was a good horse, she said. He was. Elias came to stand beside her, taking her hand. Your father chose well. Papa always said a good horse was worth 3 mediocre men. Clara smiled despite her grief. Pepper proved him right more times than I can count. We'll get another horse when we can afford it, something young and strong. It won't be the same. No, Elias agreed, but nothing ever is. That's not necessarily bad, just different. Clara nodded and let him lead her back to the house. Inside, she washed her hands and face while Elias started coffee. They sat at the kitchen table, exhausted and somber, drinking the bitter brew and not talking. Sometimes, Clara was learning, marriage wasn't about fixing things or making everything better. Sometimes it was just about sitting together in the hard moments, sharing the weight of grief without trying to diminish it with false comfort. Thank you, she said finally, for handling it. I don't think I could have. Yes, you could have. Elias's voice was gentle but firm. You're stronger than you think, Clara, but you don't have to do everything alone anymore. That's what partnership means. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand, grateful beyond words for his presence, his steadiness, his refusal to let her collapse into the despair that lurked at the edges of her consciousness. The next challenge came a month later, when Thomas Garrett showed up unannounced at the ranch. Clara was in the kitchen making preserves when she heard the sound of a carriage approaching. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch, her stomach knotting when she recognized the banker. Elias emerged from the barn, his expression guarded. He moved to stand beside Clara, a united front against whatever Garrett had come to say. Mr. Garrett, Clara said coolly. This is unexpected. Mrs. Crow? Garrett tipped his hat, his smile not reaching his eyes. Or should I still call you Miss Hayes? I heard about your hasty marriage. Mrs. Crow is fine. Clara kept her voice level. What brings you out here? Garrett climbed down from his carriage, moving with the self-importance of a man who believed his position gave him authority everywhere. I wanted to check on the property, make sure my investment is being properly maintained. Your investment was paid in full, Elias said quietly. You have no claim here. Perhaps not legally. But I maintain an interest in all my former clients, particularly those who came so close to defaulting. Garrett's eyes swept over the ranch, taking in the repaired fences, the patched barn roof, the small vegetable garden Clara had started. I must say, I'm surprised you've managed to hold on this long. Most women in your situation would have sold by now and moved to town where life is easier. I'm not most women, Clara said. No, indeed, you're quite stubborn. I suppose that's why you married so quickly, needed a man to make the property respectable again. Garrett's smile turned cruel. Though one does wonder about Mr. Crow's true motivations. A drifter with no property of his own suddenly playing ranch owner. Very convenient. Clara felt Elias tense beside her, but when he spoke, his voice was calm. My motivations are between me and my wife. Your opinion on the matter is neither sought nor valued. Careful, Crow. I'm still a powerful man in San Angelo. I could make things very difficult for you if I chose. On what grounds? Clara stepped forward, anger overriding caution. We've broken no laws. We owe you no money. This is private property, and you're here uninvited. I suggest you leave before my husband and I decide to escort you off ourselves. Garrett's face flushed dark red. You'll regret speaking to me that way. When you need another loan, and you will need one, everyone always does, you'll find I have a long memory for disrespect. Then I'll go to another bank, Clara said. There are 3 in San Angelo now. I'm sure one of them would appreciate my business. For a moment, Garrett looked like he might explode. Then he forced his expression into something resembling civility and climbed back into his carriage. Good day, Mrs. Crow. Mr. Crow. I'm sure we'll be seeing each other again soon. He drove away in a cloud of dust and wounded pride. Clara and Elias watched until he was out of sight, then simultaneously released the breath they'd been holding. That man is a menace, Clara said. He's a bully. Bullies only have power if you give it to them. Elias turned to her, pride evident in his expression. You handled that perfectly. I wanted to throw my preserving pan at his head. Elias laughed. I'm glad you restrained yourself. Assault charges wouldn't help the ranch. Clara smiled despite her lingering anger. Come on, let's get back to work. We've wasted enough time on Thomas Garrett already. As autumn settled over the ranch, Clara and Elias fell into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, their movements synchronized by weeks of shared labor. They built a chicken coop and acquired a dozen hens that provided eggs and entertainment in equal measure. They repaired every fence on the property and dug the second well Elias had suggested. They slowly rebuilt the herd, buying calves cheap from neighboring ranchers and raising them with care. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, and then undeniably, the ranch began to thrive. The cattle grew fat on improved pasture. The vegetables Clara planted flourished. The repairs they'd made held strong. It was hard work, endless work, but it was work that mattered. Work that built something instead of just barely holding on. One evening in early November, Clara sat on the porch with her mending while Elias worked on repairing a saddle. The air had finally cooled, bringing relief after months of brutal heat. The sky was turning that particular shade of purple that came just before full dark, and somewhere in the distance, cattle were lowing their evening song. I've been thinking, Clara said, not looking up from her needle. About? The future. What we want to build here beyond just survival. Elias set down the saddle and gave her his full attention. What are you thinking? I want this place to be what my father envisioned. Not just a ranch that scrapes by, but one that prospers. One that provides not just for us, but for others too. Workers we can pay fair wages. Maybe even taking in hands who need a second chance, the way Papa did for you. That's a big vision. Is it too big? No. Elias smiled. I think it's exactly right. Your father's legacy shouldn't just be acres of land. It should be the grace he showed to people who needed it. We can do that, Clara. We can make this ranch a place where people get second chances. It'll mean more work, more risk. Everything worth doing involves risk. Elias stood and moved to sit beside her on the porch steps. But we've already proven we can handle hard things. Together. Clara set down her mending and leaned against him. I'm pregnant, she said quietly. Elias went absolutely still. What? I'm pregnant, about 2 months along, I think. I wanted to be sure before I told you. Clara. His voice was choked with emotion. Are we? We're going to have a baby. Clara turned to look at him, tears streaming down her face. Are you happy? Happy? Elias laughed, a sound of pure joy. I'm terrified. I'm overwhelmed. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. I'm happier than I've ever been in my entire life. A baby. Our baby. Are you sure? Clara pulled back to search his face. Because it's going to change everything. Babies are expensive and exhausting and ours. Elias kissed her, deep and thorough. Ours, Clara. A family. Something I never thought I'd have. Something I didn't think I deserved. You deserve this. You deserve everything good. Clara wiped her eyes. But Elias, I'm scared. What if I'm not a good mother? What if something goes wrong? What if... Hey, he caught her face in his hands. We'll figure it out, just like we figured out everything else. One day at a time, one challenge at a time. And Clara, you're going to be an amazing mother. You're strong and fierce and capable of anything you set your mind to. You really think so? I know so. They sat together on the porch steps, wrapped in each other and the gathering darkness, talking about the future in a way that felt real and possible for the first time. They talked about names and cribs and all the work they'd need to do to prepare the house for a child. They talked about the kind of parents they wanted to be, the lessons they wanted to teach, the world they wanted to build for their son or daughter. I want them to know about your father, Elias said, about the man who believed in second chances, about how his kindness rippled out and changed lives he never even knew about. And I want them to know about their father, Clara said, about the man who paid a debt he didn't owe because it was the right thing to do, about how choosing honor over convenience is what makes someone truly good. Elias kissed the top of her head. We're going to be all right, Clara. All of us. You, me, our baby, this ranch. We're going to build something that lasts. Winter came gently that year, with snow that fell soft and occasional rather than the brutal blizzards that sometimes paralyzed the Texas plains. Clara's pregnancy progressed without complication, though the morning sickness was fierce and the exhaustion overwhelming. Elias took on more of the physical labor without complaint, insisting that she rest whenever possible. They hired their first hand in January, a young man named Michael who'd been fired from another ranch for questioning unfair treatment of the workers. He was grateful for the chance and worked harder than any two men Clara had ever seen. By March, when Clara was 7 months along and moving slowly, they'd added 2 more hands and expanded their herd to 40 head. The ranch was operating at a profit for the first time in years. They'd even managed to save a small amount of money, tucked away for emergencies or opportunities, whichever came first. One afternoon, Clara was resting in bed when Elias came upstairs with an envelope. "This came for you," he said, handing it to her, "from San Angelo." Clara opened it carefully, extracting a letter written on expensive stationery. As she read, her eyes widened. "It's from Martin Holloway. He owns the big spread west of town. He's asking if we'd be willing to sell him breeding stock next spring. Says he's heard good things about the quality of our cattle." "That's excellent news." "It's more than that." Clara looked up at Elias, her expression wondering. "This is reputation, Elias. This is other ranchers taking us seriously, taking me seriously as a businesswoman rather than just a woman trying to hold on to her father's land. You've earned that respect." Elias sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand. "You and your stubbornness and your refusal to give up even when everything seemed impossible." "We earned it," Clara corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. We make a good team. The best team." Clara pressed his hand to her swollen belly. "And soon we'll be a team of 3. The baby kicked, strong enough that Elias felt it through Clara's dress. His face lit up with wonder. "She's strong." "She? I think it's a girl. A daughter with her mother's spirit and determination. And her father's sense of honor," Clara added, "whether she's a girl or a boy." April brought unseasonably warm weather and the first wildflowers pushing up through the still damp earth. Clara's time was drawing near, and Elias had arranged for the doctor from San Angelo to be on call. But babies, as Clara's mother had always said, came in their own time regardless of human plans. On a Tuesday afternoon, while Elias was working with Michael on the north pasture fence, Clara's water broke. She was alone in the house kneading bread dough when the first contraction hit. It wasn't severe, not yet, but she knew what it meant. She dried her hands, walked carefully to the porch, and rang the bell they'd installed for exactly this purpose. Elias came racing across the field, abandoning his tools and running faster than Clara had ever seen him move. "Is it time?" he gasped. "It's time." He sent Michael riding hard for the doctor, then helped Clara upstairs to the bedroom they'd prepared. The contractions were still far apart, giving them time to gather supplies and try to stay calm. Elias held Clara's hand and let her squeeze as hard as she needed, never once complaining, even when she was certain she was breaking his fingers. The doctor arrived an hour later, a gray-haired man named Patterson who delivered half the babies in San Angelo. He examined Clara, pronounced everything normal, and then settled in to wait. "First babies take their time," he said cheerfully. "Could be another few hours yet." It was 8 hours. 8 hours of pain that came in waves, each one stronger than the last. 8 hours of Elias never leaving her side, wiping her forehead with cool cloths and whispering words of encouragement. 8 hours of Clara cursing and crying and wondering how women did this more than once. And then finally, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, their daughter was born. She came into the world screaming her outrage at the indignity of it all, her tiny fists waving, her face red and furious and absolutely perfect. "You have a daughter," Dr. Patterson announced, placing the baby in Clara's arms. A healthy, strong-lunged daughter. Clara looked down at the tiny face, the dark eyes already trying to focus, the wisps of dark hair plastered to her head.
"Hello, little one," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We've been waiting for you." Elias knelt beside the bed, his own face wet with tears, and touched his daughter's tiny hand with one finger. She immediately grasped it with surprising strength. "She's beautiful," he said, his voice breaking. "She's perfect. You're both perfect." "What will you name her?" the doctor asked, busy with the aftercare. Clara looked at Elias. They discussed names but never settled on one, wanting to meet their child first before deciding. Now, looking at her daughter, Clara knew exactly what her name should be. "Grace," she said. "Her name is Grace. For the grace that brought her father back to Texas. For the grace my father showed him. For all the grace that's been given to us when we needed it most." "Grace Hayes Crow," Elias said, testing it out. "It's perfect." Dr. Patterson finished his work and gathered his bag. "I'll check on you tomorrow, but everything looks good. You did well, Mrs. Crow. Rest now, and let that baby sleep when she sleeps. You're going to need it." After the doctor left, Michael knocked softly on the door. "Congratulations, boss," he said shyly. "The other hands wanted me to tell you we're real happy for you both." "Thank you, Michael," Clara said. "Would you like to meet her?" Michael stepped into the room, his hat in his hands, and looked at the baby with something like reverence. "She's mighty small." "She'll grow," Elias said. "And when she does, I suspect she'll be giving orders around here before any of us are ready for it." Michael grinned. "I don't doubt it, sir. Not with her mama's blood." After he left, Clara and Elias were finally alone with their daughter. Grace had fallen asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling in the rapid rhythm of newborn breathing. Clara couldn't stop looking at her, couldn't quite believe this perfect creature was theirs. "What are you thinking?" Elias asked softly. "That a year ago I was alone and convinced I was going to lose everything. And now I have you and her and a ranch that's thriving, and I don't know how I got this lucky. It wasn't luck, it was courage. Yours and mine both. We chose to trust, to hope, to build something together." Elias kissed Clara's forehead. "This is what grace looks like. This is what happens when people choose love over fear." Clara leaned against him, exhausted but happy beyond measure. "I love you, Elias Crow." "I love you too, both of you, more than I have words for." They sat like that as night fell completely, the three of them together in the lamplight, a family born from loss and grace and the stubborn refusal to give up. Outside, the ranch was quiet, settled for the night. The cattle were bedded down, the horses dozing in their stalls, the chickens roosting in their coop. Everything was as it should be. The years that followed were full of the ordinary miracles that made up a life. Grace grew from a baby into a toddler who followed her father everywhere, mimicking his walk and his quiet way of speaking. They had a son 2 years later, whom they named James after Clara's father. The ranch continued to prosper, not without setbacks and challenges, but with steady, sustainable growth. They took on more hands who needed second chances, just as Clara had envisioned. Young men who'd made mistakes and needed someone to believe in them.
older men who'd fallen on hard times and needed honest work. They created a reputation not just for quality cattle, but for fair dealing and compassion. When other ranchers asked Clara how she managed it, she always said the same thing. My father taught me that people are worth investing in. Everything else follows from that. When Grace was 5 and James was 3, Elias came to Clara with a proposition. I've been thinking, he said, about something you promised me once. What's that? You said you'd take me to see the ocean someday, when we could afford it. Clara looked up from the accounts she'd been reviewing. You want to go now? The ranch is doing well. Michael's capable of running things for a few weeks. The kids are old enough to travel. Elias smiled. I think it might be time. So that summer, they loaded their family into a wagon and headed east. It took 3 weeks of travel, camping under stars and staying in small-town hotels. But finally they crested a rise, and there it was, the Gulf of Mexico, stretching to the horizon, vast and blue and impossible. Elias stood at the edge of the water, his children splashing in the shallows, his wife beside him, and felt something settle in his chest. The ocean was beautiful, magnificent even. But it wasn't what he'd been looking for all those years ago when he'd dreamed of seeing it. What he'd really been looking for was standing right beside him, holding his hand, the wind whipping her hair around her face. Was it worth the wait? Clara asked. Yes, Elias said, but not for the reason I thought. I always imagined standing here alone, a free man with no ties. Instead, I'm standing here with a wife and children and a ranch waiting for me back home, and I've never been happier to be tied down in my entire life. You're not tied down, Clara said. You're rooted. There's a difference. Elias pulled her close and kissed her, tasting salt and sun and the future. You're right, as usual. They spent a week at the coast, letting Grace and James play in the sand and build castles that the tide inevitably destroyed. They swam and collected shells and talked about everything and nothing. And when it was time to go home, none of them were sad. They were ready. Ready to return to the ranch, to the work waiting for them, to the life they'd built together. Years passed. Grace and James grew up learning to ride and rope, to read and calculate, to value honor above profit and people above property. They heard stories about their grandfather James and the grace he'd shown to strangers. They learned about their father's past and what it meant to earn redemption through living well. The Hayes Crow Ranch became known throughout Texas as a place where hard work was rewarded and second chances were given freely. Clara and Elias expanded gradually, buying adjacent land as it became available, always careful to manage growth sustainably. They became pillars of the community, respected not just for their success, but for their integrity. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Elias gave Clara a gift, a painting of the ranch as it looked that day, prosperous and beautiful, with Grace and James working in the yard and cattle dotting the green pastures. Clara hung it in the main room, where everyone who entered could see it. That's not how it looks, Grace said, examining the painting with the critical eye of a teenager. That's how it could have looked, maybe if things had gone differently. There should be more struggle in it, more of the hard times. The hard times were real, Clara said, but they don't define us. This painting shows what we built despite the hard times. That's the story worth telling. Grace nodded slowly, understanding. Like how Daddy's past doesn't define him. It's what he did after that matters. Exactly like that. That evening, Clara and Elias sat on the porch as they had countless evenings before, watching the sun set over land that was truly theirs. Not just in the legal sense, but in the deeper sense of having been earned through blood and sweat, and refusing to surrender when surrender would have been easier. Do you ever regret it? Clara asked. Paying that debt? Staying here instead of seeing more of the world? Elias didn't even hesitate. Not once. Not for a single moment. Your father gave me a second chance at life. You gave me a reason to live it. I found something here worth more than all the oceans in the world. What's that? Home. Purpose. Love. You. He took her hand, his thumb tracing the simple gold band she still wore. I spent years running because I thought that's what I deserved. But your father taught me something important, that sometimes staying is braver than leaving. Sometimes putting down roots and fighting for what you care about is the hardest thing in the world. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. I'm glad you stayed. I'm glad you fought. So am I. They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear, the same stars that had witnessed the beginning of their story and would witness its continuation long after they were gone. The ranch would pass to Grace and James eventually, and they would face their own challenges, make their own choices. But they would do it knowing they came from people who believed in second chances and the power of grace to transform lives. Behind them, through the open windows, they could hear their children arguing good-naturedly about something inconsequential. Inside the house, the lamp was lit, casting warm golden light. The barn was secure. The stock settled for the night. Everything was as it should be. "Thank you," Elias said quietly. "For what?" "For looking at a stranger in a general store and seeing something worth believing in. For taking a chance on a man who didn't deserve one. For building this life with me." "You deserved it," Clara said firmly. "You always deserved it. You just needed someone to show you that. Your father showed me first. And I finished what he started." Elias kissed her temple. "We finished it together. That's how all the best things happen." They rocked gently, the chairs creaking in their familiar rhythm, and watched the last light fade from the western sky. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys. There would be cattle to tend and fences to mend and children to raise and a legacy to protect. But for now, in this moment, everything was perfect. Clara Hayes Crow had saved her father's ranch. But more than that, she'd built something new on its foundation, a home filled with love, a business built on integrity, a family rooted in grace. She'd taken the gift Elias offered and multiplied it beyond anything either of them could have imagined. And Elias Crow, who'd once believed he deserved nothing but punishment and solitude, had found redemption in the most unlikely place. Not in grand gestures or dramatic sacrifices, but in daily choices to show up, to work hard, to love completely. He'd learned that paying a debt wasn't just about money or obligation. It was about recognizing the grace you'd been given and extending it forward, creating ripples that spread far beyond what you could see. The ranch would endure. The legacy would continue. And somewhere, Clara liked to think, her father was watching and smiling, knowing that his single act of compassion decades ago had borne fruit more beautiful than he could have dreamed. Because that's what grace did. It multiplied, it spread, it transformed everything it touched. As the last star appeared in the darkening sky, Clara squeezed Elias's hand. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," he replied. "Always and forever." And in that moment, with the night settling gently around them and their family safe inside, they were exactly where they were meant to be. Not because life had been easy, but because they'd faced its hardness together and refused to let it defeat them. Not because they were perfect, but because they'd chosen each other despite their flaws and had built something lasting from that choice. The bank had tried to take her ranch. A cowboy had paid her debt. And in doing so, he'd given them both something far more valuable than land or money. He'd given them a future, a family, and a love that would endure long after they were gone. A testament to the power of choosing grace over judgment, hope over despair, and staying over running when everything in you screamed to flee. It was in the end the only story that mattered, the story of two broken people who found each other and became whole. The story of a debt paid not in gold but in grace. The story of a ranch that almost died but instead became a beacon of second chances for everyone lucky enough to find it. And they lived it fully, gratefully, together, for all the years they were given.